you're standing now is the site of the administration building. That was the centerpiece of the Angel Island Immigration Station from 1910 to 1940. And it processed hundreds of thousands of immigrants to the U.S. People came from throughout the Pacific Rim, Asia, Russia, Australia, Mexico, and the Philippines, but those who were detained in the barracks behind you were mostly Chinese and other Asian immigrants. There was a Asian side of the building, actually there were Chinese, Japanese rooms, and a European section. And there's a hospital building up behind you, which is in the process of being stabilized right now. The Chinese Exclusion Acts were in effect between 1882 and 1943. The first laws passed by Congress to limit immigration from any race or nationality. And the Asian Exclusion Acts of 1924 greatly restricted immigration of Chinese and other Asian laborers. The Chinese Exclusion Act only allowed people to come to this country if they were from China, if they were merchants, diplomats, or students. If you were a laborer, you could not come in. But the earthquake and fire of 1906 destroyed all the immigration records in San Francisco at the Hall of Records. So the Hall of Records put out an appeal to everyone in the city, come to the Hall of Records and help us restore our files. So Chinese were not dumb. They said, hey, if I can say that I was born here, I would be a U.S. citizen. So a number of people did that to try to get around the discriminatory laws. And not only were they born, did they say they were born here, they said they had children in China. Oftentimes 6 or 7 sons, so they could bring them over. They became known as paper sons. So the federal government eventually got wise to this attempt to circumvent the laws. And the first section, the reenactment you'll see will talk about that more. Dan Nieland will tell you a little bit more about that. Today's reenactment and panel is part of a collaboration with Breakthrough, a human rights organization that uses media and pop culture to raise awareness about social justice issues, including immigrant rights, racial justice, and women's rights. It's a groundbreaking Facebook game launched on April 4th, just a few weeks ago. We're encouraging, the game is set in a divided nation in the not so distant future in the year 2049. In this imagined dystopian future, I had to look up the word dystopian for the press release. It means a very bad living condition. The country is splintered by race and ethnicity. Human rights are in peril, and the government is putting happy drugs in the water so people will not protest. Players assume the role of special agents for the Council on American Heritage on the trail of fugitive Ken Asaba. Asaba is played by, I believe, by Harold Perrineau from the TV show Lost. And also in the show is Margaret Cho, the notorious CHO, as well as other well-known actors who all donated their time. There's more information on that and other programs with Judy sitting over there on the table. Oh, Judy! As they crack codes and follow clues, players face challenges that include sex trafficking, racial discrimination, immigration and labor issues, and must make high-stakes decisions invoking the values of pluralism and democracy, dignity, and human rights for all. By presenting a dark future, the game encourages people to examine how close we have already come to America 2049 and ask how we can work together to create a better future. The game unfolds over 12 weeks, each week taking place virtually in a different U.S. city. This is the third stop in the game, and San Francisco is. And Angel Island is part of the program. So if you want to play the game, you can learn more about Angel Island. Alongside the online gameplay, Breakthrough has organized offline, real-life events such as this one. If you want to play, check out America2049.com. And again, there's handouts for Judy. And so far, more than 16,000 people have signed up to play the game, which is pretty amazing. And we encourage you to join and play. And it's a lot better use of your time than playing Farmville or Mafia War. So now I'd like to welcome the volunteers who are putting on our production today. There's more detailed information on them in your programs, but I'll say a little bit about them. Dan Nieland, who will be your narrator, was recently retired as director of the National Archives at San Francisco. He retired to pursue a jazz singing career. So those of you who heard the sound check heard a little bit of his singing. The Asian community owes a lot to Dan for his work to make the archives more accessible and to bring the A files, which are the alien files that were stored in Kansas City, to San Francisco, where they should be available starting later this year. Yeah, later this year. We also have Vicky Lee, whose day job is at a place called Mentor Graphics in Silicon Valley, but she's also performed with Opera San Jose and a number of other productions. She will be playing the role of Leung Shee. Bob Barde is a professor at UC Berkeley, an author, and despite his role here, he's an anti-exclusion spokesperson. And Chris Yu Gaoiran is a voice actor, active San Josean, and as he described it, a slow foodie who likes gourmet food trucks, like we all do. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dan Nieland.
So it's really great to be standing here in the front, in the footprint of the original interrogation table, which is this exhibit right here shows where it was in the administration building. And originally, when the building was still here, it was anything but a hot and sunny open space like it is today. So, welcome to our Angel Island interrogation dramas, or some would say, the interrogation zone. The following two dramatic readings are products of the ongoing public service collaboration between Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation and the National Archives at San Francisco. The true-life historical stories we're about to witness are taken directly from priceless archival immigration files held by the National Archives at San Francisco, from real transcripts of actual immigrant interrogations, and other federal documents compiled at Angel Island during the Chinese Exclusion Act period, and shortly after Angel Island Immigration Station opened in 1910. Early immigration files among the over 200,000 now held by the National Archives at San Francisco show that the U.S. Immigration Service investigated and interrogated Chinese immigrants during the Chinese Exclusion Act period with a meticulousness and attention to detail that some might call fanatical. Interrogations were generally taxing and arduous and could contain trick questions to trip up an immigrant. One common feature was stress. The stress of detention, short or long, at the Angel Island Immigration Station, the Immigration Service's home turf during 1910 to 1940. Of being isolated and scrutinized in its depressing, prison-like setting, surrounded by the deliberate, overbearing, adversarial ambience of an intimidating bureaucracy, before which you, the immigrant, were as a rule guilty until proven innocent. The Immigration Service cross-checked any statements or claims by each immigrant against what we might call its massive and nationwide paper database. Records from and about relatives, friends, enemies, acquaintances, white witnesses often required to verify your status, neighbors in China and San Francisco, etc. The slightest discrepancy in an immigrant's testimony could lead to big trouble with the authorities and possible exclusion and deportation. Our two stories today provide starkly contrasting examples. Both concern immigrants trying for admission as immediate relatives of Chinese merchants. Immigration Service certified Chinese merchants and their original families were an exempt class, quote unquote, not subject to the harsh barriers of the Chinese exclusion laws. A brief cautionary note: what you won't be seeing today is a dramatic rendition of the complete contents of the interrogation documents and the files. They're just too big. What you will be seeing is a small, incomplete, but interesting succession of excerpts that we lifted out of each file, then sewed back together the best we could. A whole lot more is covered in the complete federal immigration interrogations and case files. Also, strictly for purposes of dramatic flow, we've dispensed with two major characters always present at the interrogation table, the stenographer and the interpreter. The latter was usually a Chinese person who understood the relevant dialect and translated back and forth between the immigrant and the always Anglo inspector. At this point, just several thank yous are in order. First, to the Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation and Eddie Wong, Executive Director, for their wonderful backing for this experiment. To Grant Din of the AIISF and Marissa Louie, Archivist at the National Archives at San Francisco, for their invaluable supporting roles. To renowned historian and author Judy Young, who will be presiding over today's post-performance discussion. And finally, to the American Conservatory Theater Act Costume Shop in San Francisco, who came up with such dynamite, authentic early 20th century threads. Now to briefly introduce and thank our star players. Okay, as young immigrant Jung Joong in our first piece, and in a segment as the notorious Quan Kwok Wah in the second, Chris Gaoiran. As the main protagonist in our second piece, the alleged merchant's wife, Leung Shee, Vicky Lee. And representing a variety of federal officials in the U.S. Immigration Service bureaucracy at Angel Island, the immigration inspector, chairman of the Board of Inquiry, the law division, etc., professor, author, and anti-exclusion spokesman in real life, Barde. For more information about our stars, the National Archives San Francisco, and the immigration case files, please see your handouts. They contain copies of a village map from the first story, and from the second, photos of Leung Shee and Quan Kwok Wah. Interestingly, Quan Kwok Wah was born on Compton Street, which means he's straight out of Compton. Anyway, and now, finally, as the all-purpose narrator, chorus, and Rod Serling figure, I'm Daniel Nieland, recently retired Emeritus Director, now volunteering on behalf of the National Archives in San Francisco. So now, let the dramas begin. Our first story is entitled Jung Joong and the Amazing Memory Maze. In 1909, Oakland merchant Jung Doc began the process of applying to bring his son, Jung Joong, to the United States. He filed a notarized affidavit in Alameda County affirming his membership in his business, Hop Chung Jan Company, a poultry and fish dealer. Jung Doc returned to China. In May 1911, he and Jung Joong boarded the USS Tenyo Maru, sailing to San Francisco. They arrived on June 8, 1911. Father, son, and their witnesses were questioned 8 days later to determine whether Jung Joong would be permitted entry.
What are your names?
My names are Jung Joong and Jung Yin.
How old are you? And when were you born?
I'm 19. I was born in the 19th year of Emperor Gong Sok, the 6th month, 4th day. In your calendar, I believe that's July 16th, 1893.
Are you married?
Yes.
When and where were you married?
In the 2nd year of Emperor Sween Tong, in the 3rd month, 10th day. Sekhao village. That would be your April 19th, 1910.
What is your wife's name and age?
Her name is Hong Si. She's 18 years old. Her feet not found.
Where is she living?
Sekhao village.
Do you have any children?
She's expecting a child, but we do not have any children.
What is your father's name?
My father is Zong Dan.
When did you see him last?
We came together on the same steamer ship. His ticket number is 11. He was admitted as a merchant.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
I have 2 brothers and 1 sister.
What are their names? How old are they? And where are they?
Jung Joong is 21 years old. He was born in the 17th year of Gong Sok, the 11th month of the 3rd day. He's now living in Kwan Hoi and works in a piece goods store. My other brother is Jung Wood. He was born in the 3rd year of Swing Tong, the 1st month, 6th day.
Is Jung Joong married?
Yes. He is married in the 34th year of Gong Sok in the 11th month, 22nd day to Leung Shee. She's 20 years old. She has found feet. They have 1 son whose name is Leung Yi. He's 2 years old. He was born in the 2nd year of Swing Tong, 5th month, 5th day.
And what is your sister's name?
Her name is Zong Lan. She is 11 years old, born in the 27th year of Gong Sok, 10th month, 25th day. She's in China.
Did your father have any brothers or sisters?
He has 1 younger brother, 1 younger sister.
And what is your uncle's name? Where is he now?
His name is Zong Foon. He lives in Kwan Hoi City.
Is he married?
Yes, he is married to Hong Si. She does not have bound feet, but they have 1 boy and 1 girl.
And what are the names and ages of their children?
The boy is Zong Sap. He is 12 years old. The girl is Yi Kwai. She is 4 years old.
Where do they live?
They live in my village.
How old were you when you first started to attend school?
I was 8. I continued till I was 16.
Where did you go to school?
In my home village.
What was your teacher's name?
My grandfather taught me.
Was your grandfather the school teacher?
Yes.
Who's the school teacher there now?
Zong Pang.
What is the name of your home village?
Sek Ho.
About how large is it?
24, 25 houses.
Which way does the village face?
West.
How many rows are there in the village?
5 rows.
And in which row is your house located?
The 3rd house in the 2nd row, counting from the north.
How many houses are in the first row?
4, including the school.
Where is the schoolhouse located?
It's in the 1st lot.
How many houses are in the second row?
6.
Are there any vacant lots in between houses?
They all join together. There are no vacant lots.
How many houses are in the third row?
There are 5. The 5th is vacant.
How many houses are in the fourth row?
There are 6. There are no vacant lots.
And the fifth row?
4. The 1st and 4th are vacant.
Are there any other buildings of any kind in this village?
There is a celebration house near the schoolhouse.
How is your house constructed?
It's brick.
How is your house located in proximity to the houses adjoining it?
They're joined together.
And who, besides your mother, brothers and sisters, reside in the third house, in the second row?
My 2 brothers, my sister, father, mother, my brother's wife, and their children reside there.
Is your brother's wife a bound-foot woman?
Yes.
But your wife has natural feet, unbound feet.
Yes.
Where does your paternal uncle live?
He lives in the 4th house in the 1st row.
Does anybody else live in that house besides his family?
No.
Who lives in the first house in the second row?
Zong Wo.
Is he married?
Yes. His wife has natural feet. They have 3 boys and no girl.
What are their names and ages?
Zong Goon is 21 or 22 years old. He's unmarried. Zong Bak is 14 or 15. Zong Jim is 8 or 9.
Does anybody else live in that house?
Zong Mao lives there with his wife. She has bound feet. They have 1 boy and 1 girl.
And what are their names and ages?
Zong Nan is 11 or 12. Zung Ho is 8 or 9.
Who lives in the fourth house in the second row?
Zong Yok, he is married to a woman with natural feet. They have no children.
Does anybody else live in that house?
Zong Leung is who's married to a woman with natural feet. They have 1 boy and 1 girl.
Who lives in the third house in the first row?
So that he is married to a woman who has natural feet. They have 2 boys.
And who lives in the first house in the third row?
Zong Yat, he is married to a woman with natural feet. They have no children.
So who lives in the third house in the third row?
Zong Yao, he's married to a woman with natural feet. They have 1 boy.
Anybody else live in that house?
Zong Lao also lives there. He's married to a woman with natural feet. They have 1 boy.
Good. How is your village supplied with water?
Water comes from the river, northwestern corner of the village.
Are there any entrance gates to your village?
Yes, there are gates between the schoolhouse and the river.
What village is north of your village?
Dongxing is about 1 li north.
Is there any village to the east?
Saiwan is about 2 or 3 distance to the east.
And in which direction and how far is the nearest market?
Oh, Jiejian is to the south.
Are there any mountains near your village?
Yes, the mountains are 10 leagues to the north.
Is there anything further that you would like to state?
No.
Immigration officials compared the facts of Jung Joong's testimony with a map created from his father's testimony. In a letter written to the Chinese inspector in charge 6 days after Jung Joong's interrogation, the immigration inspector noted,
There are no discrepancies. In fact, I have never had a better case to examine. I recommend landing.
Jung Joong was admitted to the United States the very next day on June 23rd, 1911. So that's the end of the first story. You can see that some Chinese immigrants survived the investigation and interrogation gauntlet rather well. Others fell into a world of prolonged distress and trouble. One might emerge from the experience victorious but never unscathed. Our second story is entitled Leung Shee and the Shadow of Suspicion. Leung Shee arrived at Angel Island on July 9th, 1913, with her young son as the wife of San Francisco Chinese merchant Quan Kwa Kwa. She was returning to the U.S. after several years in China. Leung Shee was brought before the Angel Island immigration inspector the day after her arrival.
What is your name?
My name is Leung Shee,
Where were you born?
China.
What is your husband's name and age?
He is Quan Kwa Kwa, 51 years old.
How many children have you ever had?
Only this one child. His name is Kwang Hu Tong, 5 years old, born in Checksum Village, Guangdong, China, in the first year of Emperor Sanfang, 3rd month, 8th day.
Are you sure it was the 3rd month, 8th day?
Yes, I'm certain.
Your husband says it was the 2nd month, 8th day.
My husband is mistaken.
Where did you live in San Francisco before going to China?
A building on Jackson Street near Baker Alley. It's also known as Banghai's building.
How long did you live there?
I lived up there up till the time I went to China, about 7 years. I also lived on DuPont Street near Jackson.
What is your husband's business?
He's a merchant in the firm of Fufang, a liquor store at 742 Washington Street.
Have you ever heard of the Tai Sing building?
Yes,
Where is it?
it's on DuPont, but I don't remember what corner of DuPont Street.
Did you ever live in that building?
Yes,
When?
We lived there from 1898 for 2 years.
And then you moved to the building on DuPont near Jackson?
Yes. The Chinese call it the double stairway.
So how is it that you stated just a moment ago that you lived at DuPont and Jackson until you moved to the Bung Ai building?
I forgotten that I lived in the Taiping building for 2 years.
You're dismissed.
The very next day, Leung Shee's lawyers posted bond for her release. She left Angel Island, but she had not yet been officially admitted as a merchant's wife. The investigation continued.
August 7, 1913. I am informed that applicant Leung Shee has been known as a procurer and the keeper of the houses of prostitution. I understand that the chief of police of Oakland can give information which will show that she was associated with her alleged husband, Hua Hua Hua, in that same business.
The husband, Quan Qua Qua, was called to be re-examined at Angel Island.
Oh. What is your name? Quan Hua Hua. You are appearing here again as a witness in the case of your alleged wife, Leung Shee, and your son. What further testimony do you have to offer?
I wish to correct the testimony I gave the other day to my residence. I gave the other day relative to my residence before we left the United States for China. We used to live on Jackson Street. And shortly before we departed for China, we moved to Washington Street, DuPont, which is correct.
Have you anything further to state?
I want to correct another statement I made the other day. I said my boy was born the 2nd month, 8th day. It should be 3rd month, 8th day.
How did you happen to make that mistake?
Because lack of memory. These dates are better remembered by the mother.
Have you ever been in any trouble with the police? Were you not at one time under arrest and charged with the killing of another Chinaman?
Yes, but all the Chinese in Chinatown know about it, and they know that I was falsely accused.
Did you have a trial?
Yes.
And at first you were convicted, weren't you?
Yes, but at the second trial, I was dismissed.
Isn't it a fact that before your second trial came to pass, the papers in your case had been destroyed in the 1906 fire, and that you had previously been sentenced to hang for that offense?
That is not...
Because of this destruction of your papers, you were afterwards set free.
That is not so. My attorney defended the case. The judge found that I was not guilty. It was a put-up job.
It appears that this woman, while operating a house of prostitution in San Francisco, was also known as Kim Yen. When this woman is brought to the San Francisco office of his service, I would also suggest that Miss Donaldina Cameron of the Presbyterian Mission in San Francisco be asked to be present for the purpose of identification. Mr. Rowe, a bartender, formerly a special police officer in Oakland, Chinatown, told me this woman, Leung Shee, was a keeper of a house at 1 Jackson Alley in Oakland. The door of the house had a wicket on it. You all know that houses of that kind have a wicket on the door. You know well what kind of houses they are without my telling you.
Leung Shee was called to Angel Island a 3rd time on January 10th, 1914.
Have you ever been known by the name Kim Yen?
No.
When did you first arrive in the United States?
I came here when I was very small. 4 or 5 years old, I think.
Did you follow any occupation after you became able to work?
I sewed for a living.
And after you were married, where did you go?
we remained in San Francisco and did not go anywhere else.
Do you know the address or the name of the place where you lived in San Francisco?
I've forgotten about all that.
How long did you remain in the house on DuPont Street?
All of 6 or 7 years.
So you were there for 6 or 7 years, and you don't remember the number of the place on DuPont Street?
I can't recall it.
Did you ever live at 1 Jackson Alley in Oakland?
No.
Did you ever live at 49 Ross Alley in San Francisco?
No. Well, I have visited it. I don't know who kept the house, but I have a woman who's kind of a sister who works there. When passing, I would go up to see her from time to time.
How many rooms did your sister occupy there?
She did not live there. She only worked there, cooking and washing. I called her Amoy.
What do you mean by a kind of sister?
In a sense of a good friend.
You were quite a frequent visitor to that house, were you not?
No. I was there only once after the fire and the earthquake.
So how do you account for the fact that policemen who were detailed in Chinatown stated that they had seen you around that neighborhood at numerous times?
I can't account for them knowing me, as I don't know any policemen around there.
Did you remain in Checkham Village all the time you were in China?
No, my husband also took me to Canton and Macau. That is all, though.
In a former statement taken here, you stated that you had never been in Macau. How do you account for that discrepancy?
Most of my former statements were not true. My mind was confused. My son was being examined for hookworm, and it upset me considerably.
But you were recalled and given an opportunity to correct any errors.
I was told by the interpreter that I could not make any corrections. He stated that after you made a statement, you have got to stick to it.
On March 5th, 1914, the Board of Special Inquiry reached a decision regarding Leung Shee's case.
It is the unanimous decision of the board that the applicant, Leung Shee, be excluded and ordered deported. First, the evidence shows that she has derived benefits from and shared in the proceeds of prostitution. Furthermore, she is a person likely to become a public charge, with no evidence produced before the board that she is the legal wife of her alleged husband, Kwong Kwok Wah. Leung Shee, you are notified that you have the right to appeal this decision to the Honorable Secretary of Labor at Washington, D.C. Do you wish to appeal this case?
I don't know. I want to see my husband first.
On March 6th, McGowan and Worley, lawyers for Leung Shee, wrote to the San Francisco Commissioner of Immigration. We desire to appeal the excluding decision to the Secretary of Labor. We have not yet had access to the evidence upon which the denial is based.
Leung Shee and Quan Hui Tong were detained at Angel Island from March 5th until their release again under bond and parole on April 18th, 1914.
On August 27, 1914, the law firm McGowan and Worley wrote again to the Commissioner. Dear Sir, we have been furnished with a copy of a certain report by Inspector John Robinson. A certain house of prostitution alleged to have been conducted at 49 Ross Alley is referred to very frequently. In fact, it would appear to be the government's intention to have it appear that our defendants were interested in the said house of prostitution. But, as a matter of fact, the house of prostitution formerly located at 49 Ross Alley was closed before the arrival of the defendants from China. And the building in which it was situated was not built or opened until after the departure of Quan Guagua and his wife Leung Shee for China. The defendants are entitled to have it made clear that the House of Ill Fame was not and could not have been in operation until after they left for China in 1908, and that it was actually raided and closed before they returned.
On April 16, 1914, the Bureau of Immigration in Washington, D.C. wired us as follows. Present evidence under exclusion does not justify denial. Immediate release should occur. On December 28, 1914, all warrants of arrest and bonds were canceled. Today is March 19, 1915. Since the actions above were taken, the alleged husband of Leung Shee was killed. The latter, along with her alleged son, are therefore in the United States without legal status, having entered as the wife and son of a merchant. While it might therefore appear that they could be excluded, their right to admission has already been passed upon by this office. While warrant proceedings for expulsion might be successfully undertaken, I doubt the propriety of such action. Leung Shee, as of today, March 19th, 1915, you and your son, Quan Hui Tong, are hereby ordered admitted as legal U.S. residents.
Here ends the federal immigration paper trail and this Angel Island immigration story for Leung Shee.
I'm just going to spend about 10 minutes giving you an overview of the immigration experience at Angel Island for majority of those who came through between 1910 and 1940 and were processed through here, and talk a little bit about the impact of that experience on them. And then I will turn the mic over to Bill Hing to talk about how this history relates to what's going on right now with immigration problems today. And then we will follow that with both Catherine and Jirayut, and they will speak to their experience as immigrants. Just as a point of background, between 1910 and 1940, San Francisco and the Angel Island immigration station here was the entry point for over 500,000 people coming from 80 different countries around the world. Now, 2/3 of the 500,000 people were Chinese and Japanese, about 100,000 Chinese, 85,000 Japanese immigrants. Then the remainder of the 500,000 were immigrants from India, from Korea, from New Zealand, Pacific Islands, and Australia, Canada, and even certain parts of South and Central America and Europe. We know that the third largest group were Russian refugees who came east across Siberia, took a ship in Japan, and ended up at Angel Island when the Atlantic route was closed to them during the war years. So there's much more of a diversity of immigration on this at this immigration station than we had previously known. And that was the point of our research in looking at the different experiences of these various groups that were all processed through Angel Island during this 30-year period. In fact, it's by comparing the different groups of immigrants' length of stay at Angel Island, plus their experiences, what they remembered happened here to them, and how they felt about it, that helps us understand how Angel Island represents the best and the worst of American immigration history. Because certainly, while some were welcomed to America's shores and kindly treated at Angel Island and were only kept overnight or 2 nights and then released and admitted into the country, there were many more who were not treated as well and who were excluded, detained, excluded, and eventually deported. Which treatment immigrants would encounter at Angel Island, whether they would be easily admitted through a simple process or whether they would be detained for long periods, subjected to more investigation, and eventually even excluded, where they would have to appeal and either be deported or finally be admitted. But which treatment they would encounter as we examine all these cases of various immigrant groups coming through was determined by their class background, for one thing. So regardless of what your ethnic or racial background is, if you came with money and could prove that you were rich, more than likely you will be admitted very easily. Even with the Chinese Exclusion Act, particularly because the Chinese Exclusion Act exempted merchants and those who are from wealthy background. Other considerations were your political convictions. During one spell, there were laws that were passed to exclude, to ferret out and exclude those who had anarchist or communist leanings and beliefs that would be a danger to the national security. Now, this is back in the 19-teens and 1920s. So that would be another reason why certain groups would be detained and investigated because of the political beliefs. And Russians, in particular, the third largest group that came through after the Bolshevik Revolution, some of them were escaping Bolshevism and wanted to come to escape political persecution. And they, because they came from Russia, their ethnic and national origin, meant that they became highly suspect for maybe being political subversives. And they were given a different line of questioning to make sure that they weren't. Whether your home government had a good relationship with the U.S. government or not, also the determining factor. So it helps us understand why the 85,000 Japanese who immigrated through Angel Island, their experiences were so much easier than the Chinese. In fact, the Japanese immigrants were detained for no more than 2 or 3 days. They were subjected to a physical exam and a brief interview, and their deportation rate or exclusion rate was the lowest among all immigrant groups, even lower than European immigrants coming through Angel Island. And that's because Japan was a superpower during this period and had worked out a gentleman's agreement that, allowed Japan to screen applicants and stop laborers from coming and to control immigration. So that when Japanese immigrants arrived with the proper Japanese passport, they were never questioned about their legal right to enter. Just as long as they were physically fit and financially stable, they were admitted within a day or two. But often, we see that race was probably the biggest factor and helps us to understand why the Chinese in particular and South Asians, or those from India and at the time, they probably had the hardest time. It was because of the racism against Chinese and against Indians at this time in California in particular, but because this was also reflected in immigration laws that had been passed. I mean, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which was not repealed until 1943, was the first time in U.S. history that an immigration law was passed to stop a group from immigrating on the basis of race or national origin. And although it was targeting Chinese laborers, it really made it more difficult for any Chinese to enter the country. And in 1924, the Immigration Act said all aliens ineligible for citizenship would not be allowed to enter the country, regardless of your class background. So that meant Asians, because they were the only ones ineligible for citizenship until 1952. Nationality, of course, also has a role to play in who would be denied entry, because the quota acts that were passed in 1921, 1924 was an attempt to establish quotas that would stop Southern and Eastern Europeans from entering the country through Ellis Island or through any of the other ports of entry. So at that time, Russians and certain other European groups had low quotas assigned to them because it's based on who was here of their background back in the 1890s. So that meant that for Russians, they had a hard time coming in because of these quotas based on nationality. So nationality could be a factor as to why people were excluded. Now, when they built this immigration station here on this beautiful island, it was called the Ellis Island of the West. And it was supposed to be this paradise and this immigration station with state-of-the-arts that would be the processing center and the detention center for immigrants coming across the Pacific, landing in San Francisco. But in actuality, it was very different from its counterpart in Ellis Island, because Ellis Island enforced the immigration laws that restricted but never excluded European immigrants, which were the bulk of the immigrants, 12 million coming through Ellis Island. Whereas Angel Island, that was, was built mainly to enforce the Chinese exclusion law of 1882 and other anti-Asian immigration laws that followed in 1917 against Asian Indians, in 1924 against the Japanese and Koreans and all Chinese. And then in 1934, the Tidings-McDuffie Act was an attempt to stop further immigration of Filipinos. They were given a quota of only 50 a year. So the immigration station between 1910 and 1940 was, the immigration inspectors and the workforce here was to apply the immigration laws, enforce them. And so if you have immigration laws that are already biased and flawed and unfair and discriminatory, that's what the immigration officials are doing their job to enforce. We know that at Ellis Island, for example, 80% of the 12 million that came to Ellis Island spent no more than a few hours on Ellis Island. Usually they were given a very, what they call a 12-second physical exam, a lineup walkthrough, and then they were asked a few questions about their rights to enter. And majority did not have to stay overnight or be detained. The 20% who had to be detained at Ellis Island were only there at most for a few weeks. Usually it's because they were suspected of having some contagious disease, or they were considered public charges that may not have money to support themselves and become a public charge, or they were waiting for relatives to come and bring them money so that they can reach their next destination and prove that they do have a way of settling, finding work, and not becoming a public charge. Whereas at Angel Island, it was most of the people coming by steerage, the 500,000 who arrived at San Francisco port between 1910 and 1940, all those who came by steerage were automatically taken to Angel Island. If we looked at the statistics, the Chinese, because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, were the ones who were taken to the Angel Island detained the longest. 75% of Chinese were taken from the ship onto a ferry and taken to Angel Island for further investigation, compared to 38% of other non-Asians in particular who were immigrating at this time. So you can see that the Chinese were singled out for detention as well as further investigation because of the Exclusion Act. So the ordeal of detention and the immigration process for the Chinese in particular helps us to understand why Angel Island is remembered as a negative aspect of our story as a nation of immigrants, a nation that has always touted itself as being a country that welcomes people to our shores and give them the opportunity to partake of the American dream and to assimilate and become a part of America and to contribute to America. If you think about European immigrants coming to Ellis Island, this was the expectation. So they were welcomed, as were European immigrants coming to Angel Island. When we compare their experiences with Asian immigrants in Angel Island, they too were only processed through very quickly, and a majority of them, less than 1%, were in the end excluded or deported. And their living conditions, they were all segregated from Asians and men from women, and their living conditions and their treatment was better than the treatment accorded particularly to Chinese immigrants. Why did it take so long? Well, most of the immigrants here, the detainees at Angel Island here, 70% at any time were Chinese, because of this process that they were singled out for, and that is they first had to wait to be called for a physical examination, as were all immigrants that arrived at Angel Island. But the physical examination for Chinese were much more harsher, more invasive, more humiliating in many ways. They gave them the physical examination to make sure they didn't have contagious diseases. And for Asians in particular, they want to make sure they don't have parasitic diseases that are more characteristic of people coming from Asian countries. Hookworm, liver fluke worm. If you have this in your stool sample, that would be a reason to exclude and deport you and not admit you into the country. Europeans were not given this exam because they're not from Asian countries where they would have go barefoot and have unsanitary conditions and would get these diseases. They were examined for TB and other diseases, but not for parasitic diseases. So Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, Indians were the ones that had to go through this physical exam. And sometimes they used the physical examination to prove that you really were not or are the age that you said you were. The Berkeleyan exam, they would even examine your genitals and the size of your bone structure and everything to say you couldn't possibly be 16 years old, as you say. And inspectors could ask for that kind of physical examination if they doubt your true identity. And if they could pass the physical examination, then they would wait for to be called for this intense, invasive interrogation that you just witnessed. I mean, those were very typical cases of how the interrogations went, what the inspectors were looking for to try to stop you from entering the country. And only the Chinese, because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, were subjected to that intense. Well, there were a few others when they suspected them of other reasons for exclusion, but only the Chinese actually went through this process, because the Immigration Service figured that this was the only way they could prove whether you are who you say you are, whether you have the relationship you have, and whether you have the right to be admitted or not, is to put them through this examination. And so many Chinese recall that was the most difficult and harshest treatment they had on Angel Island, to wait, being called for interrogation, then being cross-examined, called back and forth, sometimes for days while they interrogated the witnesses and compared their answers. So it's truly a cross-examination. And Chinese tried to prepare for this as best as they could. When they bought their passage and their identities, they also were given coaching notes that told them everything they should know about who they were and where they came from, the village life and so forth. So they came prepared. And if they should trip up or get an unexpected question or give a wrong answer, the Chinese kitchen crew at Angel Island found ways, when they're on their day offs, to get coaching notes, cheat notes, and bring them back and get it to the immigrant. So that's how we can understand why they were so good at passing this examination that many of us would not have been able to pass without coaching ahead of time. In fact, there were immigrants who were really who they said they were and didn't study their coaching notes and failed the interrogation and were deported. So it was a game of wits, and immigration officials knew that most of the Chinese coming through were probably not who they said they were, and it was a matter of proving that with this interrogation process. And if they did fail the interrogation, they did have recourse to appeal, unlike today. They were able to hire attorneys, and they were able to appeal to the higher courts in DC and in the federal system. And in most cases, the 75% who chose to take this route and fight exclusion deportation, 93% of them did win the cases, but they would have to pay the lawyers, and in most cases they would have to stay locked up on Angel Island for months while their appeal case went through the court system. So, you know, the ordeal of being locked up for long periods, being subjected to this physical examination and to the interrogation, and then even being excluded in the end, and then having to fight that, staying locked up and treated as criminals. And as Dan said, the point was you are guilty until you can prove to the Immigration Bureau of Special Inquiry that you are innocent and that you are who you say you are and you have legal right to enter. So the onus of proof is on you, unlike in criminal court when you think about it. So those that were locked up for long periods, who had the strongest feelings of frustration and anger of being treated like a common criminal for no other reason than trying to enter the country, who felt that the exclusion laws were wrong to begin with and discriminate against the Chinese. And they all said it's because China is a weak country, they can't protect us. We look at Japan protecting the interests of Japanese immigrants and how they're treated so much lighter and easier than we are. So they were aware of this. And those are the immigrants, those that were detained for long spells here. They are the ones who wrote the Chinese poems. They left a written record. They left their cases and their complaints and their protests carved into the walls with Chinese poetry, lines of Chinese poetry. And fortunately, we were able to save the immigration building before it was destroyed in the 1960s. So that if you read or you listen to the poems when you visit the immigration barracks, the building that's now the museum, was where all the Chinese were kept. And at sometimes also European immigrants and Japanese were also kept there, but mainly it was used as a Chinese detention barracks. And you can see for yourself and listen to the words, the poetry, the anguish and the anger of many of these detainees, Chinese detainees, against the wrongs that they felt had been committed against them. So as I said, in the end, only about 7% of the Chinese who were excluded initially were deported. But that's not to take away from the ordeal of their experience at Angel Island, that as expressed in the poetry and in their stories, actually they were able and encouraged to tell it to descendants and families after they had been admitted. Because the emotional and psychological scars of detention and an experience at Angel Island stays with them for their whole life and continues to haunt not only them, but their descendants, the next generation. Certainly many, like my father, who came as a paper son and was admitted, went on to lead a life of deceit and duplicity, forever afraid of being detected and deported at any moment. And the stigma of being unwelcomed, undesirable, of being demonized as unworthy, unable to ever be an American, that stigma reinforced the sojourner mentality that the Chinese immigrants who passed to Angel Island felt that they were never wanted here. And even though they were admitted, they kept this, that they could never be American, they could never be part of the society, be accepted into the society, even as they built families and communities here and made their contributions to the country. They always had remaining to feel that they were just sojourners and not Americans, because after all, they couldn't become naturalized citizens until 1943. And it also brought on a very strong sense of political apathy, that the Chinese didn't want to call attention to themselves, they didn't want to get into trouble, so they didn't participate politically in trying to change things. In most cases, they kind of just kept to their own business and kept a low profile and hoped that they won't be detected. So that explains why not only the apathy but the non-involvement of Chinese in politics for generations. Because our family, my parents always said, don't get involved politically, don't go to a protest rally, don't call attention to us, we're going to all be deported if they ever did, if they ever realize who you are and how I got into this country. Then there's this paper son syndrome that we all live with, that are passed on to us as children of these detainees. We live a life of secrecy, not understanding why we have two last names and two identities, not knowing what our family history is and how our parents immigrated and what happened to them at Angel Island and why they are the way they are and why they put us through this feeling of not belonging here and not trying to become politically involved. It causes a sense of a lack of self-esteem as to who we are. It certainly denies us our ethnic history as well as our ethnic pride. So these are some of the scars, I think, not only what happened to them while they were here waiting to be admitted, but thereafter, that I think we need to be mindful of in understanding the whole unjustness of what happened to certain immigrants being processed to the Adrian immigration station. So at this point, I think I want to turn it up to Bill.
Thanks. I will be quick. I will be 10 minutes. I think that you want to hear from the students because they're the ones that are going to bring it home. You know, they asked me today to try to make a connection between what you saw and current immigration policy, but I think you can do that. And I'm going to make you do that in a minute. But before I do that, I do want to say this actually is it's meaningful to me because both my parents came to Juan. My father for 3 months and my mother for a week. I actually didn't find out about my father until I went looking for my mother's immigration file in San Bruno and found my father's in addition. And you know, and also it's meaningful to me because the island, the buildings, they're emblematic of anti-immigrant sentiment of the time, and so they should remind us that history repeats itself very often. So now I'm going to ask you. So you heard a lot today already. Did you hear anything that reminds you of anything happening today or triggers anything in your mind with respect to anything that's happening today with respect to immigrants or anti-immigrant policy? Yeah. Why do you say the Mexican border? Is this the equivalent of the Mexican border from 1910 to 1940?
Well, what you guys happened to you guys was more dramatic.
You think it's more dramatic to go through this interrogation than walking across the border when it's 120 degrees and Operation Gatekeeper forces you to go across the border that way, knowing, ICE and the Border Patrol knowing that in all likelihood there's a high degree of chance that people are going to die, average of 1 person a day along the border? Do you think that this is harder than that? You know what? You don't need to compare. You don't need to answer that question because they're both tragic. So the Mexican border analogy is a good one. Anyone else hear anything today that reminded you of anything that's happening? Excuse me? Taxes and people being in debt? Why? What's that connection?
Because back in the days when the Chinese were... I said because back in the day when the Chinese used to be here, they were always in debt, and if they made any money, they would have to give it away.
And so today, people are always in debt?
Yeah, there's a lot of people in debt.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say that the economy, obviously, the economy drives anti-immigrant sentiment. And so the fact that back then, there was a lot of allegations of economic competition during the Chinese exclusion era and the other exclusion eras. And today, what do you hear about why we don't want Mexicans or other Latinos here? Because they take jobs away from us, because they hurt our economy, because they use our social services. It's very analogous to what went on back then. Anything else? Well, again, it's along the lines of the economy. There's a deficit. The deficit actually today is manifested. We blame anyone we can for the deficit, but we mostly blame China actually for the deficit. And the truth is that when it comes to the deficit, you have to think about trade today, okay? And what we forget is that the United States, under the Bush administration, entered into, and unfortunately Obama administration wants to do the same, has entered into more trade agreements than any other time in our history. What does that mean when we enter into a trade agreement with Mexico, like NAFTA in 1994? It means that those goods and commodities that go across the border, you don't have to pay tariffs on it, okay? And so when we agreed to NAFTA with Mexico, we lied to Mexico. We told Mexico, you know what, this is going to help you create jobs because you'll be able to produce lowly priced goods, and we're going to buy all that here in the United States, and it's going to create jobs in the United States. Guess what happened? Well, we continued to subsidize U.S. manufacturers, U.S. corn farmers, for example, so that today, it comes as a surprise to people, but 99% of the corn that's purchased in Mexico was grown here in the United States. We have put corn farmers out of work in Mexico. So where do they look for work? They look to El Norte because for generations after generation, that border, people have come and gone. That's the big difference between Mexico and Asian immigration. You couldn't just come across the ocean that easily. But the border, there was no border. There was no border until 1848. In 1848, when we invaded Mexico, and Mexico gave up 2/3 of its land, we're standing where Mexico was. But that history and tradition of going back and forth across the border continued well past the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, even on to today. And so it's to say that we blame Mexicans for coming across the border is really short-sighted because it's our economic policies that have controlled the lives of many working class and peasant workers in Mexico. We should understand why they're here before we chastise them. Anything else that you heard? Yeah.
I'm not sure how long this Q&A is.
Separation of family is a big deal in the Asian American community. If you were to ask Asian American policy makers and what the big immigration challenges for Asians, it's family separation because of the backlogs that exist in the current family categories. But the same thing happens today with respect to other immigrants. Latino immigrants are separated because of the border. Detention, you should have mentioned detention if I asked you. This is detention. Obama is on a record pace for deportation, more than the Bush administration, and is detaining more people than the Bush administration. So Obama, I voted for him. I'm going to vote for him again. Google La Bamba Obama, you'll see my song for him. But he has not done anything for us immigration policy-wise. Anything else before I turn it over to students? Yeah.
They're denying people of habit.
You know, this is all about borders. This is all about not understanding. Didn't think during 1910 to 1940, actually beginning 1800s, that Chinese would make very good citizens. We don't think that the new immigrants that are coming here in large numbers are going to make good Americans. And so we don't provide enough visa numbers. We don't provide enough work opportunities. We actually have screwed up the economies of several of the other countries, and then we turn around and blame them for crossing the borders. Thanks.
Bill, could you say something about the parallels regarding illegal immigration before and now?
Well, first of all, I don't use the term illegal immigration, okay? To me, they're undocumented. And Judy and I have had debates over this. I respect them for what they want to call themselves. And yeah, you know, sometimes jokingly, somebody from Mexico will call himself or herself, somebody's looking over my shoulder, a mojado. But, you know, most people who come here today, there are large numbers of undocumented immigrants that come here, and they come here to feed their families. They come here to work. They don't come here to steal jobs. They don't come here to get welfare. They don't come here to commit crimes. All that stuff, welfare rates, crime rates, they're all way lower than the average citizen. And so the parallel is very strong because, as Judy was saying, large numbers of people that came through here, my parents included, used false claims to get into this country. They made false claims to citizenship, false claims to being merchants, and that's the parallel today. They were undocumented immigrants, and today the argument is that, for example, the children of undocumented immigrants who are born here shouldn't earn U.S. citizenship, birthright citizenship. It's the same thing. They could have done that to us, and it sounds like Judy and I were both beneficiaries of Wong Kim Ark, that U.S. citizenship is conferred upon people that are born here, even if their parents may be undocumented.
first of all, thank you all for, sitting out here in the sun and listening to us talk for however long. It really means a lot to me that you guys are all like listening and like open to hearing our stories. So just know that it's as discomforting for me to like stand up here in front of a bunch of strangers as it is for you to all be sitting here and listening to it. So to begin with, I'll share my story, and then hopefully we can come to some kind of understanding about how to move forward from our shared experience here on Angel Island. So my name is Catherine. I'm 22 years old. I'm a senior at UC Berkeley, and I'm studying political science. When I was 4 years old, my family moved here to America from the Philippines. And although I remember some parts of living there and even some parts of the plane ride over, I never, growing up, identified as an immigrant. And it didn't make sense. I mean, I spoke English. I was fluent in English when I got here. I wore all the same clothes as my friends, and we, like growing up, we listened to all the same music. Like, everyone at the time listening to Backstreet Boys and NSYNC and Britney Spears, regardless of where you come from or what you look like. So I didn't see how I would be different from anyone else that was born here. And more importantly, I was indoctrinated with American individualism at a young age. And I thought, like, it doesn't matter where I come from or who my parents are or where, how much we make, because all that matters in America is that you work hard. And so I worked hard, and I worked, really put all my energy and effort into my education. And I thought that, education is power, and knowledge is power, and all you have to do is work hard and get your education, and that will take you where you want to go, right? And that's all something that we've been raised as Americans, and just like this myth that's been perpetuated. So in high school, I knew that I wanted to go to college, and more importantly, I wanted to go to the best college here in California. So I wanted to go to UC Berkeley, and I was sure. So I took all the required tests. I took all the AP classes, and I got really involved in my school, and I thought, okay, it doesn't matter if I'm undocumented, it doesn't matter if I was born in the Philippines, I just worked my ass off, and I got into the best school. And, I just kept going through this in high school and not really understanding why it is important to identify as an immigrant. So I got my acceptance letters in March, and I was ready to go, and I was enrolled, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to go. Until this is the summer of 2007. It was also the same summer that Congress failed to pass immigration reform. And in that same summer, after I worked my butt off for 4 years, I had to drop out of this university that I worked for, And it was the most heartbreaking experience that I could imagine as, an 18-year-old student. So for the next 2 years, I dreaded going to community college. I hated every single day of it just because that's not what I wanted. And like America had promised me that I could do whatever I wanted, and that's not what I wanted. Eventually, I ended up transferring to UC Berkeley, studying political science. But like that experience of having to drop out of the school that I wanted to be in really highlighted the experience of like suffering through the experience of structural inequality. And that means is that there are opportunities that are limited to people based on circumstances that they can't control. And it doesn't matter how talented you are or what you want, it's just that it's embedded into our system. So right now, I was supposed to graduate this semester. I'm supposed to graduate in May, but I ended up having to drop out of UC Berkeley for the second time. Not because of my academic record or anything. It was just because currently, we suffer, like as immigrants, we still suffer the same injustices that other people in the past have faced. And, not having a social security number means you can't access financial aid. And more importantly, you can't even find a job you can't find legal employment to work for the money that, you want to put towards your education. So those are like still lasting impacts of the immigration system. Again, it's not because I chose to come here illegally. It's just the consequences that I face on an everyday basis. So, by sharing this story, I just really wanted to show you that, like, through this, being an immigrant today, we're still suffering the same history of inequalities. And today on Angel Island, I wanted to, give you the opportunity to think about, first, what are the values that you're learning, and what are the values that you're teaching to your children if you're of the older generation? But what are the values, that you're promoting as a student, for example. As important as it is to be, like a good and honest person, are you also emphasizing the importance of being involved politically? Like, are you passing on to your family and your peers the importance of civic engagement? Because knowing that all these injustices still exist, and you have the power to do something about it, what are you doing to change these problems? And I really want, I'd really like to encourage you all to take what you've learned here on Angel Island today and continue to have those dialogues and conversations when you get back to where you're from in the Bay or around here. I don't want to make assumptions, but again, I really just want to encourage you all to continue this dialogue, because these things don't happen. Like as Judy was saying earlier, there's a lot of the lasting impact of facing injustice is to be quiet, and that's a really unfortunate impact, but how are we going to change those things if we still continue to stay quiet? So, that's the question I want to leave in your heads. I'll pass it over to my colleague, New, unless you have questions. All right, cool.
Wow, Captain did a great job. I want to say again, thank you for being here. It's really good for me to be here and see everyone here to get together with open minds and to be open to understanding issues and topics about immigration and what's affecting even immigrants today. I want to introduce myself. My name is Jirayut, or actually she introduced me as New. That's my nickname. I am currently 21 years old. I am a junior or third year now at UC Berkeley. I'm studying molecular and cellular biology. And before I wanted to first tell you about my personal story and family background a little bit. So I was born in Thailand, and I lived there and grew up there until I was around 9 years old. And then I would say growing up, I lived in a somewhat upper middle class environment, because my parents were young and they were business people and they were successful. But of course, around the late 90s, the economy took a really bad turn, and my parents' businesses went downhill. It got shut down. We had substantial amounts of debt, and my parents decided that really one of the appealing options is to move to America, and they first moved here first, just the two of them, to see what was possible, to see what opportunities there were here, to see if it would be viable to move here. And after a year later, after they moved here, my two siblings and I followed, and we moved. And while I wasn't really told that I actually wasn't told that we were gonna move to America completely. So I only packed for a vacation trip, actually. So I didn't bring any toys, anything, all of those things. And we got here, and my parents kind of talked to us and said, this is what's needed. They think that they had a better opportunity here to start over and to just work hard and to build ourselves up again. And so that's kind of what my family kind of put our minds to for like about a decade or so. I would always ask what I could help my parents and our family, and they would always say, just concentrate on your education, because it's kind of been I've been fortunate because my parents really understood the importance of education, that you need a degree to get a good job, and So that's what they told me growing up, and that's what I took to heart, and I studied hard, and went to elementary school. From in third grade, I barely understood English, and I would always I was embarrassed to ask teachers, oh, can you repeat yourselves one more time? I had to make new friends, to now, being pretty proficient in English, and attending UC Berkeley now. That's kind of how I got here now. But next, I kind of wanted to relate what we talked about today at Angel Island and some of the injustices and inequality that was present in the immigration system back then to what is still present now. So I am an undocumented student as well, and so working through middle school into high school, I didn't really know exactly what that meant. I just thought that if I did really well in school, got all A's, perhaps graduated top of my class, that would somehow lead to me being able to get into a good college and then therefore to have success. And I studied really hard, and I applied to all the UCs and even some private colleges, and I got my letters of acceptance. And it was between UC Berkeley and UC Davis and a couple other schools. But I lived in Sacramento during high school, and my parents, UC Davis gave me a letter along with the acceptance, an offer of the Regents Scholarship, which basically would pay for almost all of the tuition every year for all 4 years. So, my parents were like, oh, it's decided, you're going there. Until about probably a week before the deadline to send in your SIR, I went to talk to the financial aid office, and I found out that, oh, actually, you are not eligible to receive that scholarship that we just offered you. And I, tried to ask them if there was any other way, any other alternative, proof of just residence that I could provide, but without really the status of being a permanent resident. They just said, no, I'm sorry, just come back again, just try back again when your situation changes. And that's crazy. How am I supposed to try back again when I've studied so hard, and I was expecting to go to a good college, and I really got accepted, and it was right there, and I felt like I could grasp it, and then it was just taken away. For me personally, though, it turned out that I got really fortunate, and through working part-time jobs in restaurants, and getting paid under the table, and applying to scholarships, and with a little help from my family, I was able to go to UC Berkeley, even though it's continuing to be a struggle financially. That I've been fortunate that I've been able to continue my education there, and hopefully finish there. But I wanted to actually, when I was listening to Judy's talk, she mentioned how paper sons, how the immigrants back then that came through, fraudulent papers, how they kind of had to keep this low profile kind of living and mentality the whole time they were here, because they were afraid of at any time, they would be found out and could be deported. And that's very much similar, if not exactly the same, to my experience growing up here. I was told to not ever talk about this topic to anyone, not even when I was in elementary school. And as a result of that, it really made it difficult to assimilate and to even just fit in and be able to deal with my own situation, because I really had no one, anyone else that I could talk to and relate to. So that's definitely, a similarity that can be found within the lives of the immigrant population even today. Yeah, and I just want to quickly finish off on also the continuing flaws within their immigration system that in some way is that me as an undocumented student came as a result of that because of the immigration system's complex bureaucracy and all the policies that make it so hard to immigrate here legally. Then people can fall out of status, families are separated, and sometimes you start off petitioning to come here and be of legal status, and just through time, because it takes so long, you can age out, something called aging out, and you are then ineligible 6 years later, whereas you would have been eligible if your paperwork had gone through earlier. So with that, I just wanted to go back to what Catherine said and encourage also just to keep in your minds going out of today what your roles could be and how you could change it, how you could affect it, because your voices do matter when there's a certain bill or policy that's trying to get through. It's actually what matters the most is for you as citizens, as constituents of the government representatives, to let them know and to call in and to write in to tell them what you want to happen, what you want to pass. So, thank you.
I think if people would like, you're not too hot and ready to fall over. If anyone has questions of any of the panelists, here's your opportunity. Please don't.
So I just want to ask both of the students, so since you guys came earlier in your years, why were you never petitioned? Like, what happened? Because you came at 4, and what age did you come at 12?
9.
9. And then also, can you speak more about, like, not just the, okay, so I had to drop out of the major university, but I mean, even just, when did you actually, was that the only time you ever realized that you were an immigrant? And I mean, could you mention more experiences about the difficulty as a young person and now what we face as immigrants and the experience even, or was it really only when you got your UC Berkeley acceptance that you just realized that you were an immigrant?
Okay, so that's like 4 questions in one. Okay, I don't remember the first. Oh, why can't I petition? Okay, so that's actually a complicated aspect of my family's immigration case. Like, I came on a tourist visa, whereas my mom came on a permanent residency type visa thing. So, just based on the complications of being in like family preference categories when you apply to come to the United States, that changes the way, changes my eligibility to petition. So right now, the DREAM Act is the only solution for me. I did kind of know. Okay, so the DREAM Act is basically a pathway to citizenship. Right now, like, there's no waiting line to get into, because like you can't wait in line to get your situation fixed, because that option's completely closed off to us as already being here undocumented. I realized I was like something. I mean, I always knew that I was an immigrant, but I didn't want to identify it because I didn't see how being an immigrant affected my life. I mean, I did live in a different way that my friends who lived in like big houses and both their parents worked and everything. But I just wanted, like, why do I have to make myself be an immigrant when at heart it doesn't matter? Or that's how I thought. Though I remember, like, I had some vague suspicions when I was growing up. Like, when my parents, they wanted to get a Blockbuster membership, and my dad said that my mom was his fiance when in fact they're already married. And later on I realized that's because of like the fraud that was committed when they petition, or when they, came here on visas, or when my mom came here on a visa. So already, like, those weird things about, like, my parents lying about something as little as a Blockbuster membership, or, like, not answering the phone if you don't know who it is, or, like, not answering the door if you don't know who it is, and, like, just pretending not to be home. And I just thought that was kind of weird, but still, that doesn't mean anything. That's not necessarily specific to my immigration status or anything. It's really when I found out, like, my brother was older than me, and he found out first. But even so, I thought, okay, I knew I'm undocumented, but I'm going to apply to these colleges anyway. And see, it really doesn't matter because they accepted me, right? So, finally, like, the main point of realizing the importance of it is when you are denied rights. And to me, that came at, age 18. Like, even though you're denied the right to, like, drive or have a driver's license at 16, it didn't matter because I can just take the bus, right? It matters when, it prevents you from moving on to your future. And I can't remember your other questions, but I'm sure New can answer. I don't know.
Sorry.
How come you never got petitioned, or what, like, in that process?
What is the
So my situation might be a little bit different than Catherine's. So I came here on a tourist visa, and the hope was that, like, my dad petition was put in because my aunt had become naturalized because she had married an American citizen, and she was already naturalized, and so she petitioned for my dad, and I was under him as as a part of his spouse and family and kids. But then basically, it's still, we're still waiting right now. So we filed probably in 2001, and it's still coming out, so it's been a while.
You're over 21.
Yes, and I'm over 21 too. So, I mean, to answer the other questions about kind of what else I faced, not just when I applied and got denied to universities. For me, I kind of knew early on my situation. I didn't know exactly what it meant, but it started coming up more and more, age 16, 17, 18, when, all of your friends going to high school were getting part-time jobs at, In-N-Out, at Cold Stone, and I really could not do the thing. And they asked why I didn't have an ID, going to something as trivial as going to see an R-rated movie. Imagine you not being able to show proof of, identification to show your age, and I couldn't even get in to see a movie. That's just like one example.
Thank you.
Okay, so you as a young audience, you have to know that the next president isn't going to be elected without acquiring the young people's support. So that's why I really, really want to encourage you to stay politically involved, and not just, it's important to understand history, but it's also important to know the power that you have as a young person today. And so when we talk about, these injustices that are happening, make sure that your voice is heard. Don't just let it, happen when you have so much potential to change things. So, yeah, bye.